Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving deep into the raw, undeniable cultural power of musical rebellion, and honestly the rather dark, systemic reality of the industry that profits from it. We're going to trace a really fascinating path together. We'll start with the explosive DIY energy of early punk, look at how that very ethos empowered marginalized voices, and then we're going to flip the script to examine how the sheer authenticity we crave from these artists is tragically often consumed by the very industry they work for.
So let's kick things off by asking a pretty difficult question, one that totally challenges our romanticized view of rock stars and their supposedly glamorous struggles. We love to celebrate the rebellion, the noise, the sheer defiance of modern music history, right? But when you strip all that mythology away, especially the myths surrounding tragic young deaths, what are we actually left with? What is the true cost here?
To answer that, we're going to break this explainer down into 4 distinct acts. First up, the punk rock blueprint. Second, the rise of Riot Grrrl. Third, the price of brilliance. And finally, protecting their creators. Let's get into it.
Act 1. The punk rock blueprint. Picture the mid-1970s. We've got this massive excess of youthful energy just forging a total cultural reset. Over in New York, you had the Ramones taking pop minimalism, speeding it way up, and layering it with this brilliant, sarcastic humor about teen boredom. But then, you look across the Atlantic, and the Sex Pistols have taken a much darker route. They were weaponizing street realism and this intense, nihilistic rage to warn of no future, right during the Queen's Silver Jubilee. They literally made a theatrics of rage the absolute backbone of their credibility.
And then you have The Clash stepping in, and they built on that exact foundation. But they turned their guitars into weapons of social questioning. Through what critics at the time called tower block rock, they observed their environment with incredible, sharp detail. Songs like Garageland basically became folk chants for a totally disaffected youth. But you know what the biggest takeaway from this first wave of punk was? It was the DIY mentality. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that you didn't need a massive corporate machine to make art. You could just pick up an instrument, create your own image, and shout exactly what was on your mind.
Moving right along to Act 2, Rise of Riot Grrrl.
Fast forward a bit to the early 1990s. Women in the Pacific Northwest took that exact DIY ethos and evolved it into something fiercely their own. Now, 70s trailblazers like the Slits and Joan Jett obviously laid the groundwork, but the real catalyst hit when women in local scenes, like Olympia, Washington, just got fed up with the male-dominated, frankly exclusionary nature of punk at the time. So they used the indie networks that were already there and started self-publishing zines to circulate ideas the mainstream was just completely ignoring.
And these bands were not holding back. Bikini Kill, Bratmobile, Heavens to Betsy, they were fearlessly tackling incredibly heavy intersectional issues. They weren't just writing catchy pop songs. They were using the loud, abrasive medium of punk to express pure frustration over things like domestic abuse, racism, and patriarchy. It created a space where anger and intense emotion, which were usually only deemed socially acceptable for male songwriters, were suddenly forcefully reclaimed by women.
Even the spelling was a total act of rebellion. By focusing on the word girl, they specifically wanted to harness the power of childhood, which is often a time when young women had their strongest self-esteem. And replacing that I with a growling R, it's literally a growl. It was this brilliant, symbolic way to take back a derogatory term, tear down established images of femininity, and inject it with raw, undeniable power.
Kathleen Hanna actually put it perfectly when she was talking about Sonic Youth's Kim Gordon. She said, "Just knowing a woman was in a band, trading lead vocals, playing bass, and being a visual artist at the same time made me feel less alone." I mean, that perfectly captures the whole point. The Riot Grrrl movement proved that the punk rock blueprint wasn't just a musical aesthetic. It was an incredibly effective tool for building a safe, supportive, and highly politicized community.
Which brings us to Act 3, the price of brilliance. And fair warning, this is where we have to pivot to a much darker reality.
We have to ask, how does the very industry that profits off all this raw rebellion end up crushing the rebels? We've all heard the tortured genius myth, right? Well, the academic data completely strips that away, revealing a devastating psychological pattern known clinically as the vulnerability triad. Think of artists like Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse. They all exhibited this exact configuration: intense emotional volatility, chronic distress that often stemmed from childhood trauma, and a reliance on substances just to cope. The ultimate tragedy here is that their immense capacity to articulate human emotion coexisted with this devastating inability to navigate their own private suffering.
Let's talk about the 27 Club for a second. It's a cultural myth, pure and simple. The actual clinical truth is that musicians face an excess mortality risk of 1.7 to 3 times that of the general population throughout their entirely 20s and 30s. A landmark cohort study looking at over 1,000 chart-topping musicians found absolutely no statistical mortality spike at age 27. It's a systemic, ongoing crisis, not a curse stage.
When we get a glimpse directly into these artists' minds, it's just unvarnished human suffering. Take Kurt Cobain's journal. He wrote, "I'm so tired of crying and dreaming. I'm so alone. Isn't there anyone out there? Please help me." It is heartbreaking, yet the industry actively repackaged this profound pain as a marker of authenticity. Think about how Amy Winehouse's defiance of rehab became a massive, celebrated hit song, or how Cobain's visible suffering was literally used to lend credibility to grunge's anti-establishment vibe. The media consistently frames these struggles as just part of being an artistic genius.
And rather than supporting their most vulnerable creators, the music industry effectively acts as a total institution that catalyzes this vulnerability triad. The environment normalizes self-destruction. Think about it. Touring schedules peak right during an artist's most developmentally vulnerable years. You've got unfettered backstage access to drugs and alcohol, and unbelievably, contractual penalties often actually discourage artists from stepping away to seek professional psychiatric help.
Janis Joplin nailed this tragic divergence when she said, "On stage, I make love to 25,000 people, then I go home alone." We see this over and over again, a wildly successful, adored public persona hiding a desperately isolated private reality. And because getting conventional help is often stigmatized in these artistic circles as a threat to their creative edge, artists get trapped. Historically, even the medical establishment failed them by treating the addiction and the trauma as separate issues instead of treating it as one massive, intertwined crisis.
So, how do we fix this? That leads us to our final act, protecting the creators.
First and foremost, we absolutely must stop romanticizing self-destruction as a necessary ingredient for creative genius. Doing so only stigmatizes getting real help. When artists gain cultural capital through their public suffering, it creates what sociologists call deviance careers. These are self-destructive pathways that end up feeling completely inevitable to the people trapped inside them. As the audience, we have a real responsibility to reject those romanticized narratives.
The good news? The solutions outlined in the academic literature are highly practical and actionable. By adopting evidence-based reforms, record labels can evolve from being exploiters to being genuine stewards of their artists' well-being. We're talking about integrating actual mental health risk assessments into contracts. We need mobile, dual-diagnosis clinics that can support artists right on tour, meeting them where they work. Ultimately, we have to transform creative labor from a practice that just extracts from the artist to one that sustains them.
I want to leave you with this stark, incredibly provocative thought straight from the research, because it really challenges all of us. How many more talents must we lose before building systems that actually hear them? It's long past time we recognize that the music that scores our lives shouldn't have to cost the artist theirs. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the systems behind the sounds we love. Catch you next time.